True, he has to use the ideals, disciplines, systems of cooperation which he finds upon his path, but he can only use them well, in their right way, and to their right purpose, if they are to his life means towards something beyond them, and not burdens to be borne by him for their own sake, or despotic controls to be obeyed by him as their slave or subject. For though laws and disciplines strive to be the tyrants of the human soul, their only purpose is to be its instruments and servants. And when their use is over, they have to be rejected and broken. True it is, too, that he has to gather in his material from the minds and lives of his fellow men around him, and to make the most of the experience of humanity's past ages, and not confine himself in a narrow mentality. But this he can only do successfully by making all this his own through assimilation of it to the principle of his own nature, and through its subservience to the forward call of his enlarging future. The liberty claimed by the struggling human mind for the individual is no mere egoistic challenge and revolt. However egoistically or with one-sided exaggeration and misapplication it may sometimes be advanced, it is the divine instinct within him, the law of the self, its claim to have room, and the one primary condition for its natural self-unfolding. Individual man belongs not only to humanity in general. His nature is not only a variation of human nature in general, but he belongs also to his race type, his class type, his mental, vital, physical, spiritual type, in which he resembles some, differs from others. According to these affinities, he tends to group himself in churches, sects, communities, classes, coteries, associations whose life he helps, and by them he enriches the life of the large economic, social, and political group or society to which he belongs. In modern times, this society is the nation. By his enrichment of the national life, though not in that way only, he helps the total life of humanity. But it must be noted that he is not limited, and cannot be limited, by any of these groupings. He is not merely the noble, merchant, warrior, priest, scholar, artist, cultivator, or artisan, not merely the religionist or the worldling or the politician, nor can he be limited by his nationality. He is not merely the Englishman or the Frenchman, the Japanese or the Indian. If by a part of himself he belongs to the nation, by another he exceeds it and belongs to humanity. And even there is a part of him, the greatest, which is not limited by humanity. He belongs by it to God, and to the world of all beings, and to the Godheads of the future. He has indeed the tendency of self-limitation and subjection to his environment and group, but he has also the equally necessary tendency of expansion and transcendence of environment and groupings. The individual animal is dominated entirely by his type, subordinated to his group when he does group himself. Individual man has already begun to share something of the infinity, complexity, free variation of the self we see manifested in the world. Or at least he has it in possibility, even if there be as yet no sign of it in his organized surface nature. There is here no principle of a mere shapeless fluidity. It is the tendency to enrich himself with the largest possible material constantly brought in, constantly assimilated and changed by the law of his individual nature into stuff of his growth and divine expansion. Thus, the community stands as a midterm and intermediary value between the individual and humanity, and it exists not merely for itself, but for the one and the other, and to help them to fulfill each other. The individual has to live in humanity, as well as humanity in the individual. But mankind is, or has been too large an aggregate to make this mutuality a thing intimate and powerfully felt in the ordinary mind of the race. And even if humanity becomes a manageable unit of life, intermediate groups and aggregates must still exist for the purpose of mass differentiation and the concentration and combination of varying tendencies in the total human aggregate. Therefore, the community has to stand for a time to the individual for humanity, even at the cost of standing between him and it, and limiting the reach of his universality and the wideness of his sympathies. Still, the absolute claim of the community, the society, or the nation to make its growth, perfection, greatness the sole object of human life, or to exist for itself alone as against the individual and the rest of humanity, to take arbitrary possession of the one and make the hostile assertion of itself against the other, whether defensive or offensive, the law of its action in the world, and not, as it unfortunately is, a temporary necessity. This attitude of societies, races, religions, communities, nations, empires, is evidently an aberration of the human reason, quite as much as the claim of the individual to live for himself egoistically is an aberration and the deformation of a truth. The truth, deformed into this error, is the same with the community as with the individual. The nation or community is an aggregate life that expresses the self according to the general law of human nature, and aids and partially fulfills the development and the destiny of mankind by its own development and the pursuit of its own destiny, according to the law of its being and the nature of its corporate individuality. It has, like the individual, the right to be itself. And its just claim, as against any attempt at domination by other nations, or of attack upon its separate development by any excessive tendency of human uniformity and regimentation, is to defend its existence, to insist on being itself, to persist in developing according to the secret idea within it, or, as we say, according to the law of its own nature. This right it must assert, not only or even principally for its own sake, but in the interests of humanity. For the only things that we can really call our rights are those conditions which are necessary to our free and sound development. And that again is our right, because it is necessary to the development of the world and the fulfillment of the destiny of mankind. Nor does this right to be oneself mean with the nation or community, any more than with the individual, that it should roll itself up like a hedgehog, shut itself up in its dogmas, prejudices, limitations, imperfections, in the form and mold of its past or its present achievement, and refuse mental or physical commerce, and interchange, or spiritual or actual commingling with the rest of the world. For so it cannot grow or perfect itself. As the individual lives by the life of other individuals, so does the nation by the life of other nations, by accepting from them material for its own mental, economic, and physical life. But it has to assimilate this material, subject it to the law of its own nature, change it into stuff of itself, work upon it by its own free will and consciousness, if it would live securely and grow soundly. To have the principle or rule of another nature imposed upon it by force, or a de-individualizing pressure, is a menace to its existence, a wound to its being, a fetter upon its march. As the free development of individuals from within is the best condition for the growth and perfection of the community, so the free development of the community or nation from within is the best condition for the growth and perfection of mankind. Thus, the law for the individual is to perfect his individuality by free development from within, but to respect and to aid and be aided by the same free development in others. His law is to harmonize his life with the life of the social aggregate, and to pour himself out as a force for growth and perfection on humanity. The law for the community or nation is equally to perfect its corporate existence by a free development from within, aiding and taking full advantage of that of the individual, but to respect and to aid and be aided by the same free development of other communities and nations. Its law is to harmonize its life with that of the human aggregate, and to pour itself out as a force for growth and perfection on humanity. The law for humanity is to pursue its upward evolution towards the finding and expression of the divine in the type of mankind, taking full advantage of the free development and gains of all individuals and nations and groupings of men, to work towards the day when mankind may be really and not only ideally one divine family, but even then, when it has succeeded in unifying itself, to respect, aid, and be aided by the free growth and activities of its individuals and constituent aggregates. Naturally, this is an ideal law, which the imperfect human race has never yet really attained, and it may be very long before it can attain to it. Man, not possessing, but only seeking to find himself, not knowing consciously, obeying only in the rough, subconsciously or half-consciously, the urge of the law of his own nature, with stumblings and hesitations and deviations and a series of violences done to himself and others, has had to advance by a tangle of truth and error, right and wrong, compulsion and revolt, and clumsy adjustments, and he has, as yet, neither the wideness of knowledge, nor the flexibility of mind, nor the purity of temperament, which would enable him to follow the law of liberty and harmony, rather than the law of discord and regimentation, compulsion and adjustment and strife. Still, it is the very business of a subjective age, when knowledge is increasing and diffusing itself with an unprecedented rapidity, when capacity is generalizing itself, when men and nations are drawn close together and partially united, though in an inextricable, confused entanglement of chaotic unity, when they are being compelled to know each other, and impelled to know more profoundly themselves, mankind, God, and the world, and when the idea of self-realization for men and nations is coming consciously to the surface, it is the natural work, and should be the conscious hope of man in such an age, to know himself truly, to find the ideal law of his being and his development, and, if he cannot even then follow it ideally, owing to the difficulties of his egoistic nature, still to hold it before him, and find out gradually the way by which it can become more and more the molding principle of his individual and social existence.